You're listening to Toronto's #1 real estate podcast, powered by Watson Estates. The most successful local real estate investing starts right here, right now. Here's your host, broker, investor, and social media influencer, Bradley Watson.
Good morning, investors. Bradley here from Watson Estates. It is Wednesday, June 3rd. Happy hump day. And today there is some news coming out, as there always is, on a daily basis here in Toronto. We are #1 on Google Podcasts for Toronto real estate. And here's what we're doing. If you're just tuning in for the first time, we go through the latest news as it hits the airwaves. And sometimes we can get a little bit ahead of it as well, which is great. And today we're going to cover a few topics. We're going to talk about, first off, a comment that was added in a tweet by the head of CMHC, pretty much saying anybody who says prices will rise have bad motives. And I want to look at that. I want to look at his reasoning behind saying that and talk a little bit about what I'm seeing in the market. And then there has been some big announcements as it relates to transit projects in Toronto, specifically the Ontario line. How will COVID, if at all, impact transit infrastructure and projects that are currently underway or that are being planned to take place? And then we're going to talk about cottage countries succeeding or failing these days. How are they doing? How are they holding up? With people not supposed to be going out to cottage country, is that throwing their market off, or are they booming as people are trying to escape the city? And before we kind of jump into some news there, I can't graze over, I'm going to graze over, but I can't not mention the craziness happening in the States. It's the biggest news right now, everything going on with Black Lives Matter and the police and these what's supposed to be protesting turning into riots. And it's getting quite cray-cray down in the USAA. And yesterday I saw there was a video of Trudeau asked a question relating to Trump and his response to everything going on, and he paused for 21 seconds. If you haven't seen that clip, it's kind of heartbreaking. It's kind of interesting just to watch and see his reaction. But you can literally watch two really good TikToks during the time that he paused in the response to that question. And our hearts are breaking up here. Of course, it's not cool to see. In fact, I've even seen businesses boarding up here, concerned that the same thing might transpire. But let's keep this place clean up here, guys. Let's keep those protests fair and socially distanced, of course. But if you're feeling like, you know what, to hell with it, to hell with my neighbors, screw personal property, screw everything. Well, the CRA just announced a new snitch line is available for anyone with fraudulent CERB claims. So don't feel like you can't get involved in all of this unproductive violence that's going on, except we're going to do it a little bit more of a Canadian way. We have this new program called the LEADS program, where you can actually go online and report if someone's misusing the CERB, the Canadian Emergency Student Benefit, or the Emergency Wage Subsidy, and you can report who's cheating on these activities to the CRA. So there you go. Don't feel left out. We have other options available to you. And anyways, it's a crazy world we live in. 2020 is only halfway done. We're only halfway there. Oh, it reminds me of the song. We're halfway there. Anyways. Okay, let's get into some Toronto real estate because we got lots of news to tackle, and it's going to start off quite heavy. As you guys know, the CMHC's perspective has been quite gloomy. They've talked anywhere from 12 to 18% declines and could take until 2022 to recover. And what I think is happening, if I were to kind of read between the lines, is there's been a lot of backlash, actually, against the CMHC, and I've seen a lot of articles criticizing their perspective on it. And that's kind of important to note because what's just come out, there was an article here. This is from Better Dwelling, but they're not the only ones that's kind of pointing this out. So what's happening here is this, I don't know if he's a CEO, but they say the head, Evan Sidal, I guess he's either the CEO or whatever his title is, the head of CMHC, has warned people, listen to this article, to question the motives of anyone that says home prices will rise in the near term. He does so before rattling off a list of economic pressures against the market. So what is happening here is if you have, I don't know if he's talking about optimism or saying we're going to have price increases. I don't know about anyone expecting price increases. I mean, that'd be great, but I don't know if that's really in the cards. I mean, we're pretty optimistic around here. Obviously, if you've been listening to our podcast, you know we're pretty optimistic, but I haven't even really called for price increases. The prices are increasing. Maybe that's after COVID, but then what's the other alternative? We're going to crash. We're going to keep crashing. I'm not seeing that, and I'll talk about what I am seeing in the market. But as it relates to year-over-year prices, I think it's pretty much a consensus, even by CMHC's strongest critics, that prices are going to go down. So I don't know what he's talking about here, but what he did go on to do was explain his reasoning behind why the markets are going to continue to struggle. And I want to share with you the stats there, because as we're formulating our thinking on what our market's going to do, it's important to look at all sides. And CMHC is a big old fat side that needs to be looked at. So here's the exact tweet that he said, if you're wondering. He says this: "Please question the motivation of anyone who wants you to believe prices will go up." And in brackets, he put, "Yes, up. With our economy in slow motion, oil being given away, millions of Canadians on income support, and a greater percentage of mortgages not being paid than we've ever seen since the Great Depression." This was the tweet that's blowing up. I mean, that's a pretty big statement. That he's actually going on the offensive. That's what's interesting about this. It's no longer about like, this is what we think is going to happen. What do you think is going to happen? Now he's saying, if you have a direct opposition in your perspective on this, then your motives are wrong, which is very dangerous. And this is what kind of, in my opinion, causes a lot of the challenges we're even seeing in our economy and our social economy today. Like, all this crisis is people creating a divide. And I think what's happening here is, unfortunately, there's a divide being created, but I don't know if he's the starting point, if he's just the next step, because he has been getting a lot of flack. But here's the things that he's saying in more detail, and Better Dwelling kind of dove into it. So some of the things they've said. So the economy is in slow motion. So you might not realize this, but our GDP has actually been struggling for a while. Canada's economy has been slowing in growth for a few quarters, even before the pandemic. And it got much worse with the economic lockdown. With the exception of some noise in Q2 2019, GDP growth has been trending lower since the back half of 2017. Which is interesting, right? Because we have seen price growth continuing. So that I find quite peculiar. Okay, so what is going on with the fundamentals here? We've got price growing up, yet GDP declining. Now, of course, GDP is as it relates to Canada, but just interesting things to keep in mind. And these are factors. And CMHC is Canadian, right? Let's keep in mind they're talking about the Canadian economy. The other thing that they mentioned here was oil was being given away. So what we've talked about this a few weeks back. Oil just took a haircut, and they actually were trading at negative prices, something a few systems didn't even believe was possible. So they had all these barrels, and it became more valuable for them to pay to get rid of them than to sell them. And apparently the value sits 44.79% lower than the same month last year, and that was in April. Prices in this segment peaked in June 2008 and have been seeing slower and lower peaks ever since. This is interesting because in Canada, if you don't already know, we're kind of like based, our success generally follows the success of oil. If oil does well, we are an oil producing nation, and so it has a big impact, which is why it was one of the items that he mentioned here. And of course, oil has been struggling, and it seems like it will continue. So I guess that will leave it to Canada to decide, are we going to transition into becoming a leader in another industry, in another type of export, or are we going to remain tied to something that I don't know if oil is going to pick up substantially. If it does, it's going to be an incredible stock to have in your portfolio. Millions of Canadians on income support. This is what he said as well. So considering Canada's labor force is 18.6 million, guess what? At the end of May, the Canadian government estimates 8.29 million unique applicants on the CERB. That is, listen to these numbers, guys, 44.5% of them. That's 45% almost Canadians are on assistance right now. And so when we see this, like, oh, you got laid off, the unemployment numbers, they're bad. The backdrop of this is unemployment still going to, is it going to go back? Or are all these people who are on this benefit actually unemployed and just not being recorded as unemployed because they're collecting this benefit? Very interesting thoughts and strong words, right? Strong stats that he has here. And then the last one, the greater percentage of mortgages not being paid than we've seen since the Great Depression. We have talked about this, and CMHC said that they expect up to 20%. As we look at the numbers, they say by the end of May, the handful of large banks had approved 721,000 mortgage payment deferrals. And we've seen this. And actually, if you want to learn a little bit more about this thing called PCLs, the provision for losses that the banks are expecting, watch for that video today. We're going to be releasing that, and it's going to hit the podcast streams tomorrow morning. Make sure you check that out. But that represents currently 15% of all mortgages on their books, and that number is still climbing. So there's a very good chance we're going to see 20%. We're on track for that for people who are looking to defer their mortgage. I am not going to defer my mortgage. I refuse. But some people have no choice. So this is the backdrop behind the tweet. So with all of these things, in light of all of these things, if you say you're going to see a price increase in Canada or in Toronto or whatever he was talking about as far as prices, then you really need to ask about that person's motives. So when I make a comment like this, you guys need to be very critical about my motives, because I have clients right now who are looking across the GTA for properties. It is competitive. We're going to get into cottages, and we're going to talk about that in a bit as well. But here's the thing. Yesterday, for example, I was getting emails. So when we view a property, we get kind of text messages updating, not in every case, but in some cases, they try and keep you in the loop if you get multiple offers, especially because a lot of them now are holding offers back, at least in the low-rise segments in Toronto, because this is what I was recently looking at with clients. And yesterday, I saw a text that said there were 14 offers on one of the properties that we weren't even interested in. We didn't even want it. It had too much work. It was too much of a risk. It was a beautiful home in Leslieville, nice place, but 14 offers on it. And we were going to submit. We ended up purchasing something. We went over. I was kind of talking about that a few days ago, but we had another property that we were kind of 50-50 on. And we were going to submit an offer of 1.25 really quick and early to try and grab this property as kind of a second option. And we didn't go for that one, of course. We went for the other one. And that property recently posted that it sold for over $1.35 million, $100,000 over what we were gonna offer, and we were stretching. So to say everybody across the board right now is losing money in the short term, not happening. Not from what I'm seeing. Question my motives, but all I'm doing, guys. I hope you guys question my motives. You guys, when you listen to me in long form, so what I love about podcasts, you get my full take, right? You understand my thinking, you understand it from a full perspective, you understand why I'm saying what I'm saying, and in some cases, I actually don't say anything, right? Sometimes I just leave it up to you guys to make the call, because I don't want to be thrown out into the garbage because all of a sudden my opinion is different from yours. You guys make the call, but I am still seeing a very tight marketplace today in the short term. Maybe that changes. Maybe not. It will see. Time will tell. And the people who make the right decisions will win. The people who don't, and if they're invested in Toronto real estate, I think they'll still win. Because, let's face it, Toronto real estate, what a great place. Terrible motives, Brad. Okay. All right, let's move on. And actually, before we move on, just a quick highlight here. A noteworthy point before we get into the next big topic, talking about the Ontario line. I believe it's today or yesterday, there's been a switchover now of the Bank of Canada governor. So Stephen Pelosi is adios, and we now have a new person. Tiff McClem is now responsible. So it's a unique day because today is Wednesday, and so there's going to be a new policy statement released at 10 o'clock this morning, which is unfortunately after I'm announcing, I'm bringing this to you. But the expectation is generally that nothing's going to happen today. It seems to be like it's going to be a very quiet walk-off stage. So keep an eye out for that. Maybe you'll see some kind of announcements, but most likely you will not. But here is a big announcement that we got yesterday. Speaking to infrastructure, I want to start to talk about this idea of projects that are happening across the city. You guys will recall last week, Mayor Tory, before any announcement was made to assist municipalities, that is, which just came out pretty much yesterday or the day before, that if we don't receive any support from the feds and therefore the province coming to the cities as a bailout, that we will not be able to, there's going to be some serious drops in funding for capital infrastructure projects and specifically transit, which would be a big part of it. But yet, of course, when Ontario has their hands in it, Doug Ford just announced that things are going to move forward as planned for the Ontario Line subway project. So amidst all this questioning on whether we'll be able to continue building transit, the one that seems to be most interest to our premier seems to be going ahead. Here's the article. This one was from, I believe this was a Toronto Stories article. And it said the provincial government says it's moving forward with the Ontario line, the signature project in the largest subway expansion in Ontario's history. The Ford government announced Tuesday it will soon begin the procurement process for the Ontario line subway, though it is now choosing to split the project into two segments. So they've made minor changes, but they're going ahead. It will connect, for anyone who's not familiar with this, where you been? We actually did a while back, probably, I don't know, 4 or 5, 6 months ago. We were talking about I lose track of dates these days. Things are moving by very quickly now. But I'm going to say a while ago, we were talking about some of the major transit that was happening. And what it's going to do is going to connect, it's 15.5 kilometers, connect from the Science Center to Exhibition in Ontario Place. And so they're issuing two requests for qualifications. By issuing these first RFQs, we are one step closer to realizing our transit vision and helping to generate economic activity that create tens of thousands of jobs as the province recovers from COVID-19. The current plan in place includes 15 stations, including 17 multimodal connections to GO Transit, existing TTC subway stations and streetcar lines, and the Eglinton Crosstown Light Rail Transit line. So it's going to make a lot of connections. It's going to go right across our city. And in my opinion, one of the things I was most interested about that was it would open up a lot of real estate to people that will have quick access to transit. This is a beautiful thing about transit, is you open up new markets. When you connect people, not only are you connecting the existing places, but now you're encouraging smaller zones to change over zoning to allow for further development and growth of our economy. It's an overall really good thing. While this is definitely a step in the right direction, the Ford government did not make any reference to the completion date. And reports say they're estimating it's likely going to be delayed past 2027. So likely we're going to see some delays. I can't remember what the exact date was on that. I think it was 2023, if memory serves me. And absolutely, my memory never serves me, especially if you ask my wife. You don't even have to ask my wife. My memory is god awful. My short-term memory is really good. Used to be really good in studying for tests and exams. But if you ask me to remember my daughter's name, I'll tell you. All right, let's move on. We're having some fun here. Let's talk about, so in light of how can you possibly think prices will go up, let's take a very small walk through the Muskokas. There was another article that came out here. Muskoka, it's actually one of the bigger articles today. But as we have a lot of city investors, city folk in the GTA, not many people are as concerned about Cottage, but it's important. It's important that we know because I think some people are running away. So I wanted to add this in. It's good info to know what's been going on, especially as it relates to prices in Ontario. Muskoka real estate red hot as buyers and renters turn to cottage country. So early on when this was all going on, we were kind of talking about what could happen, what would be the implications to cottage country as things were happening. And we actually saw a lot of numbers relating to the luxury segment. So we saw that luxury properties in the Muskokas, specifically there were articles talking about how it was just nuts. It was nutso. It's crazy. And I would say luxury is probably 4 million and up, right? 4 million to 20 million, that kind of range. If you go over 20 million, you're not even luxury anymore. Like what are you, Drake? So with travel restrictions likely in place, the cancellation of events and shuttered patios across the city, the return of the sweet smell of spring just didn't evoke the same collective sense of joy for Torontonians as it has in the past. The lucky ones this summer are those with backyards, while the really fortunate ones complete these backyards with pools. That's an actually interesting point, right? A lot of people in the past could care less, depending on where you live, of course. In some of the smaller or lower price point homes, you don't care if there's a pool. It doesn't add value. Sometimes it's a pain in the butt. But nowadays, a pool is a great thing. So I'd be adding in a premium if you've got a pool. So if you have a pool during COVID, thumbs up to you. But those who find themselves on a whole other level of fortune this summer are the ones with access to a cottage in Ontario's pristine and very pricey cottage country. And this has realtors north of the city breathing a collective sigh of relief. So what this article goes on to say is what they were looking at. So, for example, they were looking at $500,000 of canceled reservations from people who lived in places like Europe and Australia. So early on in April, March and April, they were getting a ton of cancels, right? Because people weren't traveling here. We weren't fully closed, but yet they were still getting cancels. This is according to co-founder of luxury cottage rental company Muskoka District Rentals, Mary Rose Coleman. So they were already getting beat up, right? But then a second blow happened when cottage country rental market came with Ontario's inspired restrictions on short-term rentals, where all of a sudden you're not allowed having anything less than 28-day rentals. And so that was blow number 2 to cottage country. So this was all the craziness that was happening. But towards the end of April and in early May, things started to shift. People were thinking, this is a quote, people were thinking about their summer plans and realizing that they weren't going to travel. And we started to get a lot is in italics. When I think of the word italics, by the way, I think it has an X in it, but it doesn't. Italics. What a trick. English, such a weird language it is. Many people were actually looking to book for 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months, which is not unusual. But normally those people book a lot earlier, like in the August or September this year before. So what I kind of hear from this is people who travel a long way, they'll book for multiple months and they'll stay there. But now what's happening is on the short term, people are booking for a lot of months because they're trying to escape the city and it just happened. So like no one was planning on doing this a year ago. The demographic of cottage seekers, both buyers and renters, include everyone from double income, no kids, or dinks, as we called them in uni years, millennial couples and young families, to retired couples looking to share a slice of Ontario's north with their children and grandchildren for the summer months. So everybody wants a piece of it. So many of the most coveted cottages, those with the best views or exposures, are getting quickly snatched up. So here's some of the numbers or some of the overall impression of what's going on in prices. Looking at this year compared to last year, the inventory is low. And there are more buyers. So the thinking behind this is people don't necessarily want to sell. They're holding their cottage an extra year because it's like a great year to have a cottage. Why would I sell it? Right? Now, this is super funny because it's like what's going on in Toronto. You'd never hear this. Listen to this quote. It's so funny. This is from Coleman, the same lady from earlier. The prices have not gone up. However, there's less willingness to negotiate down right now because of the limited inventory available of what today's buyer is looking for. So it's like in Toronto, it's like multiple offers. We're going crazy. It's 100,000 over asking. And a good market in cottage country is, well, the prices haven't gone up, but we're not negotiating down as much. This is one person's perspective, by the way. There's other people here that actually talk about how they are going for more. So, for example, anything under $1 million is apparently flying. And a lot of cottagers under $750,000 are getting multiple offers and bidding wars, and anything under $2 million on the big three, so these are big three lakes, that's Lake Muskoka, Joseph, and Lake Roseau, is also beyond busy. Many properties are seeing double the rent offered in 2020 compared to 2019. So they're collecting more rent, they're getting more interest, which is good. This is good. These places I would rather see this than see cottages getting in a slump, which it sounds like they were going to. That was kind of the trajectory, which had people terrified. The luxury market has seen an increase in attention from buyers and renters ranging from $4 million, $20 million for purchase, as well as rental starting at $45,000 per week. So if you're expensive, you're doing really good. And we knew this early on as well as we kind of updated you guys in the Toronto #1 real estate podcast. The biggest question I'm receiving about is internet quality because obviously people are working remotely. Either way, if you're seeking a slice of lakeside cottage country real estate this summer, the time to act is now. I don't know, guys. I don't know about that last comment. I think the time to act on a cottage would have been 2-3 months ago. Right now, you're probably a little bit late to the party. That's my thinking, especially if we're seeing any boost whatsoever, which, if you're not expecting a boost in prices, I don't know, man. Right now in the short term, we've seen such a... Okay, I'm going to reserve judgment until we see the prices, okay? This week... Later in the week, we're going to, hopefully before Friday, if not, we're here on Saturday anyways, we are waiting to hear the statistics that come out from TREB on prices. I have a feeling, especially if they're able to split it up halfway through the month, you're going to see an uptick definitely this month. If we can get a mid-month report, that would be incredible. But we're starting to see an uptick locally. So if you're planning on selling in order to move to cottage country, I wouldn't do that right now. Here's the advice. When you think, oh, what's their motives? I am literally sitting here saying, if you can refrain from selling right now, you have something in Toronto, then wait to sell, right? Like if you need to sell, then that's a different story. But if you have an option, I'm going to encourage you guys just to hold on, hang tight. Good news is coming, guys. Good news is coming. So I'm not trying to fearmonger here. I'm trying to give you guys what my clients are doing and what some of the bigger investors that we speak with are doing is buying. They're not selling, they're buying. I'm going to leave it there. Woo! There you have it. if you got nothing better to do today, go snitch on somebody. And I will see you guys tomorrow morning with more. Stay safe, stay socially distanced, and stay loving one another out there, guys. All we have is each other. I'll see you next time. Take care and keep it real.